Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Major update on the extent to which Ferrari are going to make sure that Lewis Hamilton is as prepared as possible for his challenge this upcoming season to win the 8th title, this time with the Scuderia. They'll be doing a test at the end of the month in Barcelona. The team is already there preparing for it, but a couple of days later, Hamilton will get to drive last year's Ferrari, the SF24, in a Pirelli tyre test they are doing there with McLaren. The perfect opportunity to make sure Hamilton is as prepared as possible for when the teams get to Melbourne in a few weeks' time. Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate this. A pretty sensational photo that Jeremy Clarkson put out on his social medias yesterday. But we're going to start here with McLaren. You guys might recognise this fella, Alessandro Aluni Bravi. He was the, what do they call him, team representative of Sauber, something like that. And it seems like the guy cannot have a normal job title because he's now being known as the Chief Business Affairs Officer at McLaren Racing. So, yeah, congrats to him, I guess, on the new position, but I thought it was certainly surprising to say the least. Further reaction, understandably, to the big drama we talked about yesterday, the FIA arguably majorly overstepping boundaries when it comes down to the power that they are trying to seek over drivers in their decision-making. One insider has even suggested that this was a power move from the FIA president to control the F1 drivers. Are you shocked if that's the case? Not necessarily. Speaking of Oscar Piastri though, because if there was one man last year who very openly didn't really like Ben Sulayem, because there was a couple of times when he appeared to push him away, honestly. When he was trying to get involved in, post-race celebrations and stuff like that, Ben Sulayem's often in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect him to be as the FIA president. There was some talk though about how as the cars got better and better towards the end of the season, Piastri's performance post-Baku was kind of nowhere near Lando. I think it's good and bad for Lando, but when the championship was over, as far as Lando was concerned, and Max had it signed, sealed and delivered, the championship was locked up after Las Vegas, Lando was really good after that. And that's a bit concerning for me because obviously you want to see a driver deliver under pressure, which Piastri is somewhat able to do. But when that was the case, Piastri was really nowhere near Norris. So I think it's a question. There's been a feeling maybe that the gap that Piastri had to Lando this year was greater than we might have expected, certainly in qualifying, given what we saw the year before in Piastri's debut year, but it was pretty good. The quali gap anyway between Piastri's debut year and last year was basically the same to Lando, which will please Lando, but it definitely means that Piastri has a bit of work to do if he wants to get there. Still quick, still puts McLaren in a position to potentially go back-to-back in the Constructors' Championship. Is Piastri going to be a man leading up a Drivers' Championship charge? To me, that seems pretty unlikely based on the evidence of last year. But of course, McLaren, who would have expected with the way they started 2022 and even 2023 to some degree, that they would have won the championship in 2024. It is kind of remarkable to think back a couple of years ago to see where McLaren were then and kind of where they are today. And Andy Cowell, therefore, of course now team principal at Aston Martin, was trying to motivate the troops and say, can we win the championship next year? Who thinks we can? Look at what McLaren did. Why can't we do it? And sure, fair enough, I'm down for the optimism. I think the problem is, if the team is trying to attract Max for £1 billion, as maybe they are or maybe they're not, we talked about some rumours on that further yesterday, the team has to be considered a serious team. And sure, the Honda partnership, the Adrian Newey thing, they obviously look serious. But it is always a little bit difficult to take the team super serious when the owner's son is a driver. I mean, as long as that is the case, it's always going to be impossible to take them 100% seriously as a championship contending outfit. And that's also the issue. Even if they do magically turn up with a great car next year, Aston Martin, or this year in a few weeks' time, is Stroll the driver to deliver a Constructors? I mean, surely not, right? At least McLaren had that piece covered. But let's talk about these last few days with Hamilton at Ferrari. There's been a few, further things leaked here. Here's Lewis Hamilton's kind of card, basically, that he has to check into Maranello with on a badge, which I thought was pretty cool. Also some other shots of the test that he did at Fiorano. So we did about 30 laps at Fiorano, split across a number of different stints, 5 or 6 stints of 5 laps or so each. So, he was obviously in a acclimatization setting, but he wasn't really getting much proper running in terms of getting used to and actually, lap time testing and stuff like that to see where he kind of is in comparison to Leclerc. Indy's model of cars that Leclerc drove for obviously a whole year, and he's been at Ferrari for a very long time now. This was a great video that Ferrari put out again. They're killing it with their social media stuff around all this, and it was nice kind of feature at the end really where we heard Hamilton on the radio with his new race engineer Riccardo Adami, right? Because he reached out Hamilton to Vettel, maybe to Sainz, but certainly to Vettel to say, hey, is this new race engineer guy any good? I think in an ideal world, Hamilton would have brought Bono with him, right, from Mercedes, as he's brought Angela Cullen in kind of a weird workaround way. Hamilton's brought back Mark Hines and Angela Cullen into his kind of personal team. Obviously, it's raised questions on whether Mercedes had a part to play in the fact that, you know, he wasn't working with Cullen for the last couple of years of his career. And with so many things brand new for Hamilton, it's kind of understandable that he might be in a position to say, all right, I want some features of the new team that I'm very familiar with, such as bringing back some old people I know. So, you know, maybe in an ideal world, Hamilton would have brought Bono with him, but of course, Adami, Vettel at least said, is going to be good enough to do the job. We saw at the end of the clip here when Hamilton said, wow, that was amazing when the radio check comes through. So nice moment, I thought, really, and of course, a big couple of weeks for Ferrari and just the social media side of this in general. There was one thing I thought was interesting, though, about this test, because Motorsport Italy were talking about a rumour as to what happened during the test that, well, we know that Hamilton locked up a couple of times, and it seems he was struggling a little bit with the position of the pedals in the car. So this is what the Italian press have to say about it. It is said that Hamilton tried various adjustments to the pedals throughout the test without finding a solution. So maybe that's why he was coming back into the pits every so often, with his discomfort resulting in a couple of mistakes. Hamilton reportedly locked his brakes at the first corner and the hairpin when he tried to up his pace, twice coming close to running into the gravel runoff areas. Ferrari are expected, though, to resolve the issue with the pedals. So it is one of those things, isn't it? With the pedal positioning and, you know, the height and the depth, whatever the problem that Hamilton was having was, and they tried a couple of things during the session but couldn't really resolve it. Just one of these things you don't really predict to be an issue, but you turn up kind of getting used to something new and it's not really working for you. So they're expected to resolve that with the pedals before they have a second private test at the circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya, which we shall discuss here in a second. So understandably, Hamilton's going to require some changes, but the article does list a couple of good positive things. It says right here that, you know, he required few modifications with the steering wheel. He was basically adapted seamlessly to it after concerns that he would insist on sticking with the controls and functions he'd memorized before, so that seemed to be fine. Of course, they have made, as we saw the other day, some alterations to his wheel for his preferences, but, you know, it's still going to be a Ferrari wheel at the end of the day, and his initial bond with new race engineer Adami was apparently positive, according to reports. So that's kind of what we know on that. The next step, though, is pretty key for Hamilton, because he needs to get as prepared as possible for the start of the season, because this could be the chance to get the 8th title. Who knows what happens in 2026? Maybe Mercedes have an absolute rocket ship engine and there's no catch in them. So, you know, you've got to take the opportunities there here, and Hamilton can't afford it to take too many rounds for him to get up to the speed that he needs to be at. So he's got to be well prepared, and I think that Fred Vasseur and Ferrari are going to try everything to make that happen. I think it's interesting for Leclerc, because Leclerc obviously is also going to try and win this year's driver's title. In fact, he might even be the favourite over Hamilton if that was to be the case, given that obviously he has the experience and Hamilton struggled last year with Russell. Whatever your opinion on that is, it's difficult to argue which driver would hypothetically finish ahead of one another going into the new season. And Leclerc's got all the previous experience, but Leclerc at Ferrari, but Leclerc may look at the situation and say, well, it kind of seems like Ferrari are going to try everything to get Hamilton the 8th with the team, because that would be the storyline of like the ages basically in Formula 1. But at the end of the day, Ferrari will do what is best for themselves and the Scuderia in general, you would imagine. So the next test is coming up in Barcelona. This, of course, is the big one, really, because this is actually a proper racetrack where they go racing and is known as like one of the best testing tracks you could possibly go to. It has everything: long straights, of course, high speed, low speed, medium speed corners, uphill, downhill, like everything you want is there in Barcelona. The team's already there. Ferrari already there. They've got 2 cars, one for Leclerc, one for Hamilton, and that's going to be the SF23, because they can't drive the SF24 except they can in a very specific setting, and that's going to be a Pirelli tyre test for 2026. So yeah, everything is going on. Today's the 24th of January. In a couple of days, Ferrari and Hamilton are going to take to the track in a 3-day TPC, testing previous cars test. And basically, they're bringing Leclerc as well. but this is intended to get Hamilton up to speed as much as possible. He will drive the latest version of the car that he can. That's the SF23 from a couple of years ago. As we know, also an excellent qualifying car, so I think he will be able to do some testing for himself in a way in terms of where quali sits. Of course, the tyres aren't going to be the same as what, they drive with in regular Formula 1 sessions. They call them like the Academy tyres. They're not quite as grippy, but they also are going to stay in Barcelona and run a Pirelli 2026 tyre test on then the 4th and the 5th of February. Now, because that's for 2026, the teams are actually allowed to use last year's cars, the SF24. Hamilton is going to have roughly 3 days to get to grips with the SF23, and then a few days later, he gets to drive the SF24, which is last year's car, which of course Leclerc and, well, maybe Ferrari nearly won the championship with, didn't they? Maybe they could have done in another hypothetical world. That's going to be the closest that Hamilton's really going to get, you'd imagine, to the 2025 car. So it's as good a prep as Hamilton could possibly have hoped for, I think, really. And this is the plan. TPC test in Barcelona, Pirelli test on the SF24, then the joint livery launch, of course, in London. Ferrari are going to do their own one, of course, in Maranello. They're not having F1 steal the spotlight like that. And then a week or so later, we go to Bahrain and start the testing. 2 weeks after that, everyone arrives in Melbourne. So that's the setup for Ferrari. And of course, it's not just on-track stuff, but it's also simulator work as well. But certainly compared to other teams that are maybe saving their TPC testing times for later on, there's obviously been rumours about maybe teams using it, because ideally the testing previous cars thing is meant to be for like rookie drivers. So there are quite some limits on, like, basically juniors, right? There are limits on how many hours and laps the current drivers can do in the old cars. But of course, in this case, they want to use as much of that as they realistically can to get Hamilton up to speed, who's got the best possible chance of executing when the season gets underway. The other piece of the puzzle here is the simulator and how that's going to work with Hamilton, and exactly Ferrari's strategy to try and ensure that his style that he kind of got used to at Mercedes is not going to be carried over. So they want to get rid of some of the muscle memory you had from Mercedes cars over the last couple of years and start from scratch again, really. And this is how it is described. One thing that's worth noting is that Hamilton has never really been a big fan of the simulator. He doesn't, tend to like doing tests. He just prefers to drive proper sessions in the proper car. That's where he feels like he learns the most. But the simulator in Maranello is reportedly substantially better than the Mercedes one. Basically, it's more up to date, a more recent generation. But a couple of fascinating sentences here. This is coming out of the Gazzetta, so it's Italian press, so take it as you will. But they say the following: Lewis used the mathematical or the virtual model of the car that he will use, especially the SF24. So they want him to drive the SF24 in the sim because they know the SF24 in the sim is the same as the SF24 in real life, because they can make the comparisons as good as they possibly can do. That's the car he'll get to drive at least for a couple of days at the start of February. And so they've got everything that's sorted, but the plan is that they've deliberately set up the setups, like the configurations, the adjustments, to be very distant from each other at the level of suspension calibrations, engine maps and load level, to erase Lewis's sensory memory linked with his experience with the Mercedes simulator. So they want to, start from scratch here, really, with Hamilton and his, muscle memory when it comes to using the Mercedes sim compared to their sim. And they want to do this because the sim is more up to date, maybe not like mathematically, but just in terms of the hydraulic actuators and the mathematical models and all that type of stuff that they can do. Ultimately, an attempt was made to roughen Hamilton's feeling towards this sophisticated instrument. There is also talk of a further simulation using the mathematical model of the 2025 car already loaded into the simulator's memory, so as to have a direct comparison between the two single-seaters even before the real car is presented. So thought that was pretty interesting, because it's not just about the on-track running, but it's also about the simulator work that they're going to get Hamilton to do as well. So very much into your thoughts and all that stuff in the comments section below. Before we close out the video, a couple of things here from race fans. So they got people to predict on things, and it's not like these numbers are meant to add up to 100. It's just out of the people that voted, this is what they said. So a quarter of fans seem to think that F1 are going to introduce reverse grid sprint races. 30% predict that Max is going to get banned at some point for reaching 12 penalty points. And well, if he says a few too many naughty words, he might well get some more penalty points on his license, or a race ban or whatever. Points deductions we were talking about yesterday. Calendar getting longer, title decided at the final race. That'd be very fascinating if it was true. One team exceeding the budget cap is plausible. 54% think Ben Sulayem's winning the election again, which is, yeah, I'd be inclined to agree. I don't think he should, but based on, I think the elections are at the end of this year and the way that it tends to be done, I do think it's pretty likely. 81% of people suggesting that Doohan will be replaced with Colapinto during the season, so that's pretty high number. 60% though predicting that Lawson's going to earn a second year at Red Bull, which is probably about right again, to be fair, and then a couple that go even higher than that. I mean, Cadillac, is that not like guaranteed? Has it not been confirmed that Cadillac are on the grid? So I'm sure that one should be pretty high. And just finally, we've got to go through the race fans' driver rankings of the last couple of days. I'm not going to criticize these too much, really, because I think generally they do quite a good job of it. But I just wanted to present them and see what you guys think in the comments below. So at 50th, I think, went to Bottas. 14th goes to Magnussen. So I think Magnussen would definitely have ended up lower had it not been for his end to the season. But he ended the season quite strong. So with respect to Hülkenberg, he did struggle though early on. Lots of crashes, lots of moments. The one in Miami I thought was especially egregious, to be fair. So, of course, there's Monaco as well. Maybe that was Perez's fault. Whatever you think. Regardless, Magnussen was doing some questionable driving this year. He got banned for a race. But at the end of the year, he was actually quite fast. So, yeah, he finishes ahead of a load of drivers. Albon in 13th, of course, a few places ahead of Colapinto. I think it was 17th in the end. Not a particularly strong season for Albon, really. I mean, it was kind of good, but Australia was bad, he crashed. Apart from that, he was still smoking Logan Sargent's. But when Colapinto arrived, it kind of proved that, yeah, Albon maybe isn't all that on some level. Sonoda gets number 12. Maybe this is about fair. You could maybe put him a little bit higher or a little bit lower, possibly, depending on your perspective. I think Yuki was pretty damn good most of the season, was very good at the start. Then towards the end was still collecting points and, you know, again, outperformed Ricciardo, outperformed Lawson on paper. So, you know, he was the best performing Red Bull driver that wasn't called Max Verstappen of the year. But of course, he doesn't get the drive in the Red Bull. And the final one was Esteban Ocon of the day at actually number 11, which is interesting. I think that on paper, you'd think this feels a bit high just because Ocon had a strange up and down year, the crash in Monaco with Gasly, and there were loads of issues again with Ocon this season. But to be fair, for the majority of the year, he was actually pretty fast. At the end, he wasn't really, but he thinks there was something suspect going on there after it was announced he was leaving the team. He did secure the mega second place in Brazil, and, you know, for most of the season, I think in qualifying, he was actually ahead of Gasly, but at the end, Gasly had a really strong end to the season to finish as above him. But I think you can argue this one kind of either way. But very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.